I played the worst JRPG series of all time, and in this video I'll be showing you every little annoying moment, mind-boggling design choice, as well as one game that might be the single worst JRPG ever made. And the series that I'm talking about is the SaGa series. Now, I'm sure plenty of you disagree with this, but after having played every game in the series over the course of a few months, I can confidently say that I've never, in my 30 years of playing JRPGs, played a collection of games this bad. And by the end of this video, I think you'll agree with me. So let's begin with where it all started, with the Final Fantasy Legend Trilogy on Game Boy. Now, if you're wondering, why are you playing 3 Final Fantasy games? I thought you were playing the SaGa games. Well, the first 3 SaGa games were rebranded as Final Fantasy games for the West, as Square felt like they might have more appeal this way. As much as you want to gift wrap a turd, at the end of the day, it's still a turd. So let's start with Final Fantasy Legend 1. To begin, there's very little story setup, and then just throw you into the world with very little explanation. I'm used to tutorials, but there is no guidance here. You're just in this level, like, okay, figure it out. You know, I talked to this guy, he says something about a guild. I don't get it. The first door I go to is locked. There's item shops that I can't buy anything from because I don't have any money. And then another guy said there's a town to the southeast. So that's where I decided to go. Along the way, I get into some combat, and it's about as basic and as archaic as it gets. Attacks have uses to them like in Pokemon, but they don't refill after you rest at an inn. And there's no XP either. The way you level up is really strange. You have to buy upgrade items from stores, and these can be really expensive. So I eventually get to this town, and there's a shield missing from the statue, and I went to a nearby castle, but they won't give me the shield, so I have no idea what I'm supposed to do now. I'm totally lost, and so I looked up a guide. By the way, I'm only like 10 minutes into this game, and I already have to look up a guide. It turns out that you can add 3 other party members, so that makes it so much more easy, but that's 3 more mouths to feed when I go to buy items to level them up. Now, I can revive characters at this heart building. However, when I want to restore HP at the inn, I have to spend 1 gold for every HP that I recover. That's insane. It's not like other RPGs where it's like a flat fee. So this is really wild already. Not to mention, this game is a total grind fest. There's so many random battles. It's just not that fun so far. So I upgraded a few characters. I went to the first dungeon, and interestingly, monsters can change into the other monsters if they eat meat. So some characters that you can have in your party are monsters, and if they eat other monster meat, well, they can become something else. And these mutants seem to get random stat increases and abilities. Now, there are harder enemies in this dungeon, but it's not too bad. I beat the Sword King, I guess, and then I died on my way out. Yeah, I think I'm done with this game. Like I said, there's no guidance, basically no story, and it's incredibly grindy. And I get it, what should I expect from a Game Boy RPG that released in 1990? But nonetheless, it's so archaic and just not fun at all. Next, we'll move on to Final Fantasy Legend 2. At the beginning, there's this big long text scroll, something about magi and symbols of power. At the beginning, I can create a character. Now, what's nice is there is some setup and there is some context for what I'm supposed to do. At the beginning, my father leaves when I'm a young child, but then as time goes on, I want to find my father. Now, as I go on my adventure, I can bring 3 characters with me, and what's nice is so far, it's not obtuse, it's kind of straightforward. Now, I do have 1 piece of magi from my father, and apparently if I search for more, I'll find him along the way somewhere. So I leave town to go on my adventure, and our teacher, this Squid Man guy, joins us. Now, in combat, weapons have uses and they break, and you'll need to buy new equipment. But having this guest character, this Squid Man teacher, to help supplement damage and healing is so nice. It makes everything much more forgiving. Again, so far, exploring is much more straightforward. It's hard to get lost, and there's really only one place to go no matter where you look. Now, here's where things change up and kind of change permanently for the rest of the series. Stat increases here work like Final Fantasy II, where the more you use a weapon or the more you get attacked or things like that, you get these random level ups. So for example, you'll get only HP increases or only damage increases, and then you'll randomly get new abilities as well. Now, you can also buy stat increases like Final Fantasy Legend 1, but that doesn't seem to be the main way to strengthen your team. But mercifully, the game also revives any party members that have died in combat with 1 HP. A small touch that goes a long way to making the game less frustrating. Now, after making my way through this cave to the other side, our teacher, the squid guy, leaves, and now we're on our own. With the town in sight and well over 9,000 gold, I should be okay. So when I get to town, I think I see my dad. Nah, it's just a guy wearing a similar hat. And after asking around, someone told me about a shrine to the west, so that's where I went. There, I met a healer named Key who says they've seen my father, but doesn't know exactly where, but they do mention something about relics where magi might be. And then they give me this sort of cryptic clue. I need to go 4 steps to the east and 3 to the south from a big rock to the south. Now, this is the right kind of vague. At least I have some clue as where I'm supposed to go. So I go to the rock, follow follow directions, and then I go to this new secret area. Very cool. I love this kind of vagueness. Now in the dungeon, I explored and then I found 4 magi, and I can equip them, and I assume they gave me some kind of stat increases, but it's pretty unclear. Menus were very primitive in the Game Boy days, so it's kind of hard to tell exactly what stat changes happen. So when I went back to Key and told her what happened, I'm going to this new character Azura's base, and so Key will join me as a guest character. Now on my way to Azura's base, Key left, and then a character called Mass joined me. So we seem to have these random guest characters that come and go all the time. So I go to Azura's base, barely beat him, and then I'm starting to get a feeling for what this game is going to be like, so I kind of just leave it there. Final Fantasy Legend 2 is so much better than 1. It's still vague at times, but way more guidance, more forgiving by reviving fallen enemies, and I get much more money. Not to mention the constant flow of guest characters that help supplement the damage and healing. Again, I gotta admit, these retro style JRPGs aren't really my thing, but if you enjoy them, then Final Fantasy Legend 2 might be one to check out. And now we're on to the last game of the trilogy, Final Fantasy Legend 3. In the intro, they mentioned that the world's been flooded and monsters come with this water that's flooded the world. And so you're a group of young heroes and you get sent back in time to prevent the flood from happening, and then the world can be brought back from ruin. And then what's really wild is as I'm leaving, there's a character named Faye in the game, which is trippy because I named one of my characters in Final Fantasy Legend 2 Faye. It's a very, very weird coincidence. At first I thought maybe the data transferred over, but I don't think that's the case. Unfortunately, this game falls back into the design philosophy of not telling you where to go or what to do. So I fumble around what I think is my ship, and eventually I land outside this temple near a town. And there are some new twists in combat, and there's some interesting character progression. Here, it's much more of a traditional RPG where you get experience points to level up. And what's weird is enemies drop meat or parts, and if any of your characters consume them, they transform them regardless if they're a mutant or not. And so main characters change into all kinds of beasts, and one even turned into a robot, which is pretty cool. Here, spells also use up MP instead of just being used and then breaking, and weapons seem to work the same way as well, but they don't break. Eventually, I made it to this nearby town and got stuck pretty fast. There was nowhere to go, and there were constantly pits in my way. Every time I would try to just walk over them, I would fall down back to the first floor, and I thought I was going nuts when I found out I can jump. Now, I know these games don't exactly have tutorials, but letting me know I could jump when I couldn't jump in the other 2 games would have been really nice to know. Now, after making my way through the tower, I eventually got a spell called Float. It turns out this ability is something I can use on the overworld, which allows me to explore even more places that I couldn't before. After flying around for a while, I stumbled upon this town in a cave, I think. I met this gal who gave me this ability to travel to the past. So now we have an already directionless game, and now we're adding time travel on top of that? Man, I'm screwed. So I end up flying around aimlessly for like 20 or 30 minutes, and then I just gave up. The directionless nature of this game comboed with time travel, meaning you basically have to explore the same area mindlessly twice, was pissing me off to no end, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I applaud the developers for trying something ambitious on the Game Boy, but I think they flew too close to the sun with this idea. Of the 3 Final Fantasy Legend games, 2 is easily the best and most playable by today's standards, but fair warning, unless you're really into old school JRPGs like this, it still won't be that fun. Next, we move on to the Romancing Saga trilogy. Now, I need to explain this trilogy and how I'm going to tackle them. So Romancing Saga 2 and 3 got these beautiful remasters to modern consoles, however, Romancing Saga 1 never did. It did, however, get a remake on the PlayStation 2, which got its own remaster subtitled Minstrel Song in 2022. That said, there's a fan translation of the original Super Famicom version, courtesy of Transdimension and DDS Translation, so I'll be tackling that one first and then tackling the remake for comparison's sake. So Romancing Saga opens up with this exposition about 3 gods battling it out for dominance. Eventually, a human hero was called upon to use 10 gemstones and sacrifice themselves to steal these gods away. Shot in the dark, we're gonna have to find those gemstones, aren't we? Now, after the intro, you're shown a character select screen with an option of 8 characters, 4 male and 4 female. Here begins the series' storytelling roots of multiple main characters that all cross paths at various points through the game. If you love the Octopath Traveler series, here's where its history originated from. Now, there's really not much context, but I went with Hawk the Pirate because, well, I like pirates. And after starting the game, no direction, no setup, nothing. I'm just on a ship in the middle of the ocean. After fighting some sea monsters and plundering some treasure from traveling ships, I eventually found my way to the pirate coast, where apparently there was a meeting that's been waiting for me. A pirate captain talks about being more savage and killing ship passengers to instill more fear. Brutal, but hey, I'm down for it. After sailing around for a while, I came back to the captain, and now apparently I'm a traitor. He tells all the pirates in the room to attack me, and when I say all of them, I mean all of them. Of course, I can't beat them all, so I die, game over, and start over. Thankfully, I wasn't that far yet, so I get back to the same spot and I just can't escape. There's just way too many enemies and their movement patterns are so erratic that I can't avoid them. Not even 30 minutes into the game and it's already impossible. I'm sure this bodes well. Now there's 7 other characters, so maybe I just chose poorly. So I went with Gray. I ended up in a city called Bruel and I have to choose which character I want to stick with. Now I decided to stick with a girl who wants to go to a town called Estamir. The only problem is I don't have enough money to take a ship there, so I guess I'll go around and try to fight some monsters or get some side jobs. I leave town and head to an area called Loben. I go everywhere, talk to everybody, and nothing. This game is just starting to piss me off. All right, one last try. Let's try Albert. All right, his story is at least a little more straightforward. Team up with my sister to fight some monsters in a cave to the east. All right, a clear goal. I love it. Guys, what the hell? Look at how many enemies there are. And it's not like they're easy one-man fights. Sometimes there's 6 or more enemies. I really tried to be careful and maneuver my way around and just get to whatever was at the end of this cave, but I couldn't do it. I am totally baffled how a game this poorly designed could be released as the 4th entry in a series and also a year after a game like Final Fantasy IV. I mean this with every fiber in my being. I don't know how anyone had the patience to finish this game. It's just completely unfun. Thankfully, it got a remake on the PlayStation 2. By then, Final Fantasy X had already been out for 4 years, so surely there was some kind of quality standard eternally at Square, right? Right? So once again, the game gives you the choice between the same 8 characters. For the sake of seeing how things have changed, let me go with Hawk again. So right off the bat, I have to say the game looks pretty great for a PlayStation 2 title. Sure, the character proportions are a bit odd, but the actual art direction is nice, and the music is pretty fantastic as well. Unfortunately, it still drops you into the middle of the ocean with no direction as to where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to do. Thankfully, I have an idea of what I'm supposed to do if the original game is going to be any helpful guide. One thing I noticed about combat is that the game refills your life after every fight. That's so nice. If I have to deal with that onslaught of pirates like the original game, this will be my saving grace. So right away, I made my way through the caves, docked at the pirate coast, and I'm probably supposed to attend the meeting, so let's go do that. Sure enough, there's the meeting and he tells me to be more brutal and kill people on the ships we board. So after going around and fighting some more in the open sea, I come back to the pirate hideout. By the way, great map, right? As I expected, I get called a traitor and the whole room of pirates attacks me. This is just as ridiculous as the original game. It took me the better part of like 15 to 20 minutes just to get out of this room, even with the game sped up with the remastered version. But because the game refills your life after each fight, it was just a matter of time. Now I'm in uncharted waters, as this is further than I've ever gotten the original, which admittedly isn't that far. Then sadly my ship sinks and I'm marooned at this town called Gundago. And after exploring around enough, I'm noticing this new stat called LP. Basically every character has a set amount of LP, and when a character dies, they lose 1 LP. When they lose all their LP, they're gone for good. Brutal. I'm having an okay enough time, I guess. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not really finding anything all that interesting or cool. Combat is inoffensive, if not a little mindless. I'm basically just mashing attack each fight. At some point, I found myself in a battle that I was clearly not prepared for and got wiped out. Thankfully, I didn't save that long ago, but I'm just bored and I don't know where I'm supposed to go. So let's try another character. Just to try someone new, I decided to go with Claudia. So she's a ranger who grew up in a forest, and for her party members, she gets a wolf and a bear. Sweet. So this witch lady tells me there's monsters at the entrance to the forest. Here's where one of the game's many fatal flaws comes into play. You can't control the camera, making exploring an already confusing area even more confusing. It's hard to tell where you can go or where you've been and where you're supposed to go. Eventually, I found the monster that I'm supposed to fight, and it was attacking this guy named Gion.
The name's Sean.
Now, after saving him, he says he's a guard in a nearby city. So I go visit him. He introduces me to one of the other playable characters, Gray. And guess what? They don't tell you anything about what you're supposed to do next. I'm just mindlessly exploring the town, talking to everyone, and I can't stand this game. I seriously don't get what's supposed to be fun about these games. I understand the appeal of something that's directionless but rewarding, something like, say, Elden Ring. But mindlessly talking to everyone just to be given your next objective isn't satisfying or rewarding. To me, it just feels like lazy, bad game design. Next up is Romancing Saga 2. This is much more than a remaster. It feels like a remake in the style of the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. Menus are clean, text is easy to read. Very nice job on this visually. So I start off in a cave as the king with a few of my soldiers, but after getting back to the castle, it turns out that one of the characters was my son. So I brought him to toughen him up, I guess. But I also have an older brother that's more of a soldier, and this character is more of a diplomat. Now, after taking some time to explore the town and getting to know the common folk, I go back to my dad and head out on yet another mission, with my brother left to watch over the town. While it can be mildly directionless, you're at least given some hints. Environments aren't that big. If I just talk to everyone, eventually I'll be given some kind kind of hit as to what I'm supposed to do next. One complaint I have, however, is that again, there are just way too many enemies. Exploring dungeons feels like a never-ending gauntlet and it gets tiring by the end. Combat is more or less the same, where you have abilities with uses, but these can be refreshed after resting. And we are back to the Final Fantasy II style progression, where you have random stat increases and you randomly learn new abilities after using a particular weapon for a while. It's not a bad system per se, it just feels unsatisfying to me. Now, eventually I defeat the boss, head back into town, only to find that my brother is having his final moments. At this point, let me just save you the play-by-play of every little moment and give you a more high-level overview of the game, mainly because I ended up playing this one for way longer than maybe every other game previously combined. This seems to sort of be a family lineage system. Notice that each save file has a year tied to it. Once you either find enough money or complete certain objectives, time moves forward and you can purchase things to further your kingdom. These can be things like an orchard, new armor, new weapons, and I also read something about some kind of magic academy. There doesn't seem to be one golden path. It seems like this game is sort of a series of side quests that you can do however you want. And to be totally honest with you, I was really enjoying the game. The flow of the game is something like this. You unlock access to a new town, you talk to everyone, and then you find a way to complete whatever this new objective is. I dug this. It felt rewarding to find the person and then figure out how to solve the problem. However, I eventually ran into this game's fatal flaw, and it's why I ultimately ended up getting stuck. Once again, the game has an LP system. Basically, when you die, you lose one LP, and if you lose all your LP, that character's gone forever, including the main character. However, Gerard never died in my game, but I did see walkthroughs with different kings, so apparently you can keep going even if the main character dies. Where this becomes a problem is changing out party members. So in the game, it's capped at 5 characters per party, but you can't remove them. You have to wait until they lose all their LP, at least as far as I can tell. Now, that may not seem that bad on the surface, but many side quests require specific characters. For example, these martial art guys need me to kill this slime, but it requires a magic user and I didn't have one. So I purposely killed off one of my characters, which just feels wrong, not to mention time consuming and annoying. However, the one I got stuck on was breaking into this castle. Now, there's a guy at the pub that said maybe if I found the Thieves Guild, they could sneak me in. Now, the quest to find the thief was one of the coolest things in the game. There was so much detective work, but eventually you finally find the Thieves Guild, and it was one of the coolest series of events I had seen in a retro JRPG. However, I simply could not recruit the guy. I watched walkthroughs and I did exactly what they did, and the dialogue triggered for them and joined their party for the walkthroughs that I watched, but for me, the thief just wouldn't join my party. My only theory is that my party was full, and so it left him no space to join. And if that's the case, wow, that has to be one of the worst design flaws I have ever seen in a video game. It truly pained me to quit because I was really digging it, but if I was going to be constantly forced to painstakingly kill off characters just to progress, there was no way I was going to do that. Next up is Romancing Saga 3, arguably the most popular of the trilogy. Here we're back to 8 characters and you can choose one to start. I'll choose Ellen for no real particular reason. So the game starts off with a storm and a lot of these characters are huddled in an inn, stuck with the storm. Shortly after, however, a woman barges in demanding a horse. It turns out she's Lady Monica, the sister of a nearby marquis. So we all wait out the storm and decide to help her in the morning. Now visually, it's very similar to Romancing Saga 2. It looks really nice and plays great too, if not a little bit annoying with the same quirks of the random level ups. Now, once I reach her brother, she tells me of a potential betrayal and we now need to seek the aid of a nearby lord for the upcoming battle. I appreciate that the game is at least clear with where I'm supposed to go and what I'm supposed to do. So I reach the lord, he tells us of a treasure in a cave to kind of kill some time. Again, very straightforward, thank you. And the battles feel tiresome. I can avoid them because you can see the enemies on the map, but whenever I fight, it's always a big group of enemies. Now, eventually the lord and the marquis team up and everything's hunky-dory. So with our mission done, the party kind of scatters to the wind. I could see where this sort of thing would be interesting, and I could see where playing different playthroughs could be interesting to see where everybody goes. Next, I decide to board a ship and travel north, but along the way, I noticed there's this NPC that has bright pink hair and it caught my eye, and it turns out I can recruit her. Now, to be honest, she's pretty weak, but considering my party at this point dropped down to 2 characters, every little bit helps. But to be honest, by this point, I was kind of getting bored. It was getting grindy. The story wasn't all that interesting, and I kind of just decided to put the game down. Personally, I liked Romancing Saga 2 way better with the progression of time and building your kingdom, but Romancing Saga 1 is definitely the worst of the 3. If you like retro style JRPGs, you might dig Romancing Saga 3. It's solid, but nothing amazing. Next, we move on to the pair of games I've been dreading since the beginning of this video, SaGa Frontier 1 and 2. Now, these are the few games that I've actually played before this video. I remember being thoroughly unimpressed with SaGa Frontier 1 back in the day, and my only memory of SaGa Frontier 2 is renting it for a weekend, getting lost really early on, and then just never coming back. Here's hoping things are different this time around. So after doing some mild research, I decided to go with Amelia for SaGa Frontier Frontier 1. Apparently she gets access to other towns much earlier than other characters, which should make things easier. So the brief setup for her is apparently her husband was murdered by someone named Joker. No, not that Joker. And she took the fall for it, and now she's out to find Joker. Simple but compelling story. I like it. So the game begins with Amelia in jail, and then it shows a few flashbacks of finding her husband at her home, but then the killer escaping, as well as her being interrogated by the police. Shortly after, it cuts back to her in the prison cafeteria with one of the guards announcing that they're holding some kind of escape event. Essentially, they're letting the inmates get out if they can get to this one part of the jail by the time limit, but it's pretty dangerous. One of the other fellow inmates notices that Amelia is new and suggests that they team up together as she's confident that her and her other friend can get out. So they quickly team up, and one of the series' fatal flaws rears its ugly head almost immediately: confusing level design. I mean, just stop and look at this screen. There's like 5 ways you could go, and none of them are obvious. So after fumbling my way through this maze of sewers, vents, and garbage chutes, I eventually made it to this boss guarding the exit. Of course, it kicks my butt first try, but after equipping more healing items, I beat him and find my way out. Now, some quick thoughts on the combat. It's pretty much the same. It's turn-based combat, but there's really nothing special for the most part. I can do some team-up moves if I use the same abilities, but again, these trigger pretty randomly, and I could never really count on them. Again, depending on which weapon you use, you can get new abilities with that weapon if you use it over and over again, and you also get random stat level ups and random new abilities. Now, I am playing the remaster, so thankfully I can speed through combat, and apologies ahead of time if the fast forward speed gets you a little nauseous while watching. Now, after defeating this scorpion centipede thing and making my way to the exit, the guard upholds his promise and lets the 3 of us out. And not knowing what to do next, Amelia finds her way back at her old home, only to be ambushed by Joker. Thankfully, a random guy is nearby to help you and even rescues you. He then brings you to his hideout where your former inmate friends, Annie and Lisa, are there hanging out. This guy named Rufus tells me that they're essentially vigilantes doing the dirty work that the police can't or won't. He also wants to stop Joker and ask for your help. And after taking some time to think about it, Amelia agrees and is immediately thrown into the deep end with a mission: attend a fighting tournament that Joker will be attending and attempt to ambush him. Man, I gotta say, so far this is fairly straightforward. The game isn't unclear as what I'm supposed to do yet. Now, after competing in the tournament, we spot Joker and chase after him. He escapes through this secret door in one room, and after fumbling around for a while, I just couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do. It turns out there's a switch on this pot that opens up a staircase. That isn't clear at all. In fact, I wasn't even sure I could interact with it as it's part of the pre-rendered background. Anyway, long story short, he escapes and we need to come up with a new plan. So our next brilliant one is that Joker is supposedly going to be at this seedy casino, so Amelia will disguise herself as a bunny girl to see if she can track him down. Luckily, she does and follows him to this sort of like private pole dancing room place, and I try to catch him again, but once again, he escapes. And now I find myself in a massive base of some kind and need to escape. Immediately, I run into these 2 girls and we get attacked by a unicorn. It wipes us out and I need to reload my save. Thankfully, I wasn't that far back, so I give it a second try, but when I get to that same spot, I couldn't find them, so I tried to just explore around on my own, and that was a bad idea. The boss is basically impossible if you do it on your own. You need to recruit those 2 characters. So I reload my save again and round up those girls as well as this red-haired character. Then I proceed to grind a lot. And I tried the boss again with a full party and I still couldn't withstand its brutal attacks. So I grinded for another hour or so, tried again, and I just can't beat this thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or how else I could have prepared better, but I'm just not going to sit here and bash my head against a wall for hours grinding. Overall, SaGa Frontier wasn't nearly as bad as I remembered, but I'm still not a fan of its leveling system, confusing level designs, and just the massive trial and error process you have to go through, not to mention those crazy difficulty spikes. Also, it is not a looker. I feel like it looks horrible by any standard. That said, it does have a kind of interesting story, some cool moments like the fighting tournament, and also you can change your character's outfits, which is pretty cool, also very rare for the PlayStation 1. Once again, it was just very poorly designed. Next up is SaGa Frontier 2. Now, this is one of the few games in this video that doesn't have a port to modern hardware, so I'm going to play it on original hardware, so apologies if the footage doesn't quite look that good. Now, right away, what grabs you are the visuals. SaGa Frontier is easily the best looking game in the franchise and still holds up well to this day. It has a sort of storybook quality to it. There's just something about the hand-drawn watercolor look of the background with pixel characters that looks so incredible. Now, as for the story, it seems like we're going to go back to the Romancing Saga 2 design philosophy of following one character character here named Gustav over the years who eventually becomes a ruler. In fact, we follow him right from his birth all the way up until he's much older. But one of the first big story moments is he goes to his coming of age ceremony. However, he fails to produce anima, a sort of energy in this world, while holding a sword, and the king thinks he's an illegitimate son. So you and your mom are cast out of the kingdom. Years pass and Gustav has become a bit of a troublemaker as he feels like he's burdened his mom and also just feels useless. He doesn't have a lot of friends outside of one boy named Flynn who also can't produce anima. So starting out, the game is very light on gameplay. You can kind of move your character around, but it's very focused on story and pretty hard to get lost. Eventually, Gustav learns to be a blacksmith and practices with a sword since he can't produce magic. Eventually, you do get into some combat as Gustav as he wants to test his skills and explore a nearby cave. Combat hasn't changed that much. It's turn-based where you randomly learn new abilities and get random stat level ups. Weapons do have uses before needing to be repaired. However, it seems like you can kind of heal freely. Overall, combat is much more forgiving though and easier than past entries. But man, the design of the dungeons hasn't gotten any better as it's really easy to get lost. Now, as the years go on in the story, Gustav eventually weasels his way into a position of power in a smaller part of the country. And it gets really interesting. You see how he deals with various characters and how his part of the country changes and grows. There's also these new large scale-ish battles. Basically, it's just a series of regular battles, but it kind of gives it more of an epic scale. Now, I gotta be honest, I was actually starting to enjoy this game. It had an incredible art style, amazing music, a pretty compelling story, bite-sized story segments that were really digestible, but I came to an impasse once again. Eventually, one of the story segments switches to playing another character, and for a while, there was this side story for a character named Will Knights available that I kept putting off because I didn't know who that character was. That was my biggest mistake. Eventually, you're forced to play as him. When you begin, you recruit a few characters and then you explore some nearby ruins. These ruins are maybe the most confusing dungeon I've ever been in a JRPG. I got lost for hours. And what's annoying is I needed to do that side quest that I kept putting off before to do something. When I tried looking up other people's walkthroughs, they all did that side quest, so their setup looked way different than mine and I couldn't even follow them. So once again, I'm forced to quit because I have no idea where I'm supposed to go and there's nothing that can help me. Funnily enough, a friend of mine who played the game said they quit at the exact same spot, so I was happy to know that I wasn't alone. This bummed me out because I wanted to keep playing, but sadly, that wasn't going to happen. And now, my friends, this brings us to the worst game in the entire series and maybe the single worst JRPG I've ever played in my life, Unlimited Saga. This was a PlayStation 2 game and the 9th game in the series, so you'd think they would have figured it out by now, but instead they made one of the most hilariously bare-boned games I've ever played. Let's dive on in. Oh, look at that. It came with a preview of Final Fantasy X too. That was kind of them. Now, like many of the other games, you have a choice between a variety of characters. I went with Ventus because I don't know. Now, Ventus is a carrier, basically a delivery man, and he's tasked with delivering a letter to this guy's daughter in another town. I will say that the character portrait art is really nice. It has a unique style to it, but that's about the only positive thing I'm going to say about this game, so don't get used to it. Now, after you leave town, you're met with this screen. Now, take a minute and really look at it. What do you think you're supposed to do? The game doesn't tell you anything, so you're left to figure it out on your own. I assumed that I accidentally opened the menu, so I'm pressing every button trying to close it, but nothing works. I'm so confused. After fiddling around in the menus for so long, I guess that triggered a fight, and this is somehow one of the worst first battles you could ever expect in a game. I'm attacking with my spear, the only weapon I have equipped, and I'm doing a variety of attacks with it, and they all just keep missing. I don't get it. Eventually, I switched to a fist attack, and it knocked down these enemies, but they almost killed me because I kept missing with the main weapon I have equipped. So after fiddling around on the first screen for literally 10 plus minutes, I finally tried using the analog sticks, and get this, what you're looking at is the world map. No, I'm not kidding. You hop along like a piece on a board game, barely animating. You just mindlessly hop from tile to tile, fighting battles, stepping on spikes you can't avoid, and running into dead ends. It's a blast. I eventually made it to the Carriers Guild, was met with a bit of story, and then I'm off on my next task. I'll spare you the details and just say that what I just showed you is all the game has to offer. This totally boring map to explore, decent turn-based combat that has all the same quirks the series is known for, and totally uninteresting storytelling. I really don't understand what they were even going for with this game. It's like Square Enix told the team, yeah, your budget for this game's like 100 grand, good luck. It was not well received in the West at all, currently sitting at a 45 on Metacritic. critic. It was so bad, in fact, that outside of the Romancing Saga 1 remake in 2005, it basically killed the franchise with 14 years between its next release in 2016. That's really bad. And while the last two games in the series aren't as bad, I feel like they should have just ended the series there. And at the beginning of this video, I said it might be the worst JRPG I've ever played. No, it definitely is. And I've been playing JRPGs for a really long time, so to come across a new worst JRPG is really something. All right, next up we have SaGa Scarlet Grace. Here I'll be playing the remastered Ambitions version. Originally this was a Japanese only Vita exclusive, talking about sending a game out to die. Now the initial impression is pretty positive. This cinematic opening has some nice stained glass looks and it's setting up the world. But then it gets weird. Before starting the game, it asks all kinds of weird philosophical questions like, what do I think about ships? And what do I think about fireworks? It's like, okay. I think this is supposed to help recommend me a starting protagonist, but of the four, I decided to just go with Taria. Taria is a ceramist or a potter. All her pottery is starting to warp and she feels like it's her fault. So she decides to leave her shop to her apprentice and go on a journey of self-discovery. Lucky for her, as soon as she leaves town, a massive phoenix appears and she theorizes this could be the origin of her problems. So right away, Scarlet Grace has a brand new unique art style. It looks really beautiful, honestly. Kind of like a pop-up storybook vibe, like as you explore the world, pieces just sort of pop up. It looks really cool. Thankfully, it seems like we've got a little bit more of a higher budget game here than Unlimited Saga. Now, oddly, you think I could just walk up to the Phoenix and that'd be how I would progress in the game, but apparently I need some more party members first. So I go to a nearby town and recruit a team of 6 characters. Like, okay, wow, this game is just one convenient situation after the other. So now that I have a team, let's head back to the Phoenix. Oh my god, a tutorial? What is this? Are we playing a Saga game? So this battle system is a complete rehaul and frankly, one of the more interesting turn-based battle systems I've ever played. It works like this. You start out with a limited number of star points on your first turn. Character abilities require a certain amount of star points, so you're initially pretty limited, and some abilities even require a few turns to charge up. Then, in each subsequent turn, you add more star points and then you can do more attacks or do higher level attacks. For normal trash enemies, this can be a little tedious, but with boss battles, this is incredible. It forces you to be really strategic and thoughtful. So, for example, you could do your charge moves in the first round since you can't really do much damage anyway. The other thing is I like knowing the attack order, and it shows you here, which really helps when determining what abilities you want to choose. In fact, some of your attacks can even delay enemy attacks, adding further strategy. As far as leveling goes, there's a lot of the same annoying carryover with random stat increases and new abilities, but they seem more frequent and just a little bit less annoying. Also, the main character, at least with Taria here, gets something called Flux after each battle, which can level up current abilities. And when leveled up, they can cost less and do more damage. And after fighting the Phoenix, it flies away and we chase after it. And in a nutshell, that's kind of the general game loop. We follow the Phoenix, but usually there's something blocking you from getting to the Phoenix, like some kind of enemy, mist, a rock, a town, something. So we need to figure out how to get past it, get to the Phoenix, it flies away, rinse and repeat. This game is much more about maintaining your team than deep story. As the game goes on, you'll find different materials, and this is what you'll use to upgrade your equipment. Really, you have to be here for the battle system, which thankfully is pretty great, but honestly, there's really not much more to this game besides that. There are some little puzzles and side quests here and there, but really it's all about the combat. Thankfully though, the game does have a great art style on the overworld. To be honest, I ended up playing this for quite a while, like close to 10 hours or so, but at one point I felt like I had seen enough and just decided to move on. Overall, it's not amazing, but pretty dang solid. If you just want to grind in a great battle system, you might dig SaGa Scarlet Grace. Now finally, this brings us to the recently released SaGa Emerald Beyond. Now, full transparency, I only played the demo with this one because basically it starts at the very beginning and then it carries over to the full game, so I thought if I enjoyed the game, I'd just buy the game afterwards. But spoiler alert, I didn't finish the demo. So I played on Nintendo Switch, which only allowed me to play as Amaya Aisling, a witch in training. It's kind of a cool story setup though. She lost her witch powers and she needs to get them back, and she disguises herself as a high school student named Yumeha Izumi, and she's aided by her talking cat. Now, I just gotta say right off the bat, the budget for this game is hilariously low. Let me break down the general flow of this game from what I played of the demo. So there are these green, or emerald I guess, portals that appear, which are the main story scenarios and the main story battles. Now there are other portals that serve as side quests around the town, and for my character here, it was just collecting different kinds of cats. Super boring. And basically it was all on this one small town map. I could explore this map in maybe a minute or less. It's not that big. And again, I never played beyond the demo, so maybe it expands more. Maybe there's a lot more in the full game. And I think there is because I watched some reviews for it. But from what I played, this is all there is so far. But with Amiya, there's this stupid story formula that gets old really quick. Basically, she'll hang out with her friend Ren, some bad guy appears, she runs away as Azumi, and then magically appears as Amiya the witch, fights off the enemy, then Azumi returns just in time, and Ren is constantly like, where did you go? You just missed the witch again. And this gets repeated at least 3 or 4 times, and it's like, Ren, how dumb are you? She's the witch. Thankfully, the combat from Scarlet Grace carries over, and it's pretty solid. However, it does have some weird user interface stuff with it, and it seems just a little more confusing than it needs to be. Now, again, I'm not sure if it's just a small map, so there's not as much to explore compared to Scarlet Grace, the boring story, or I don't know what it is, but I was just not into this game at all. Also, it seems ultra linear, which seems like a weird complaint considering I was saying I was always getting lost in these other games. There was just very little room to do extra stuff like find random party members. So I played for maybe 2 hours or however long the demo went for. I didn't quite finish it, but I was just incredibly bored. Now, to my surprise, it has a 75 on OpenCritic. I'm not sure what to make of that. Did only hardcore fans review this game, or does it get better later on? I'm not totally sure, but it certainly doesn't leave a good first impression. Now, if I were to rank them all, it would look something like this, with SaGa Frontier easily sitting at the top and Unlimited Saga easily sitting at the bottom. Now, despite calling this the worst JRPG series of all time, and I really meant that, I want to tip my cap to the series creator, Akatoshi Kawazu. He's been with Square Enix pretty much as long as I've been alive, having worked on the first 2 Final Fantasies, creating the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles subseries, and basically worked on every Saga game. And what I'm about to say might sound like a backhanded compliment, but I mean this sincerely. Despite Saga never really being popular, especially in the West, he believed in it. He's been working on the series for over 30 years, and no matter how low the review scores got or how cut back the budgets became, he had a vision and kept pushing forward. I really admire that. It can't be easy to put your heart and soul into something for that long and only have a relatively small audience. So to Kawazu-san, I commend you for all your hard work and perseverance, even if your games really aren't for me. Now, this is what I consider to be the worst JRPG series of all time, but to see what I think are the absolute best JRPG series, watch this video next.